Vinaka, everyone. Vinaka to our viewers. We welcome you to the third episode of Marama Insight. Privileged this session to moderate, particularly our topic on fitting in. If you remember from our last episode, we talked about, it was on remembering when, and we talk about specific experiences relating to what a Songo was like, but really offering that individual experience. And I think that's the interesting thing about Marama Insight. We're offering personal insights or personal stories, lived experiences of what it's like, particularly as Fijian women. And now, because we approaching Fiji Day, I think this is when we kind of think about Fiji the most, particularly those of you that are living overseas. So in talking about fitting in today, we're going to try and remember some of those experiences, particularly challenges that you felt when you moved out of Fiji, what you did to cope, and of course, what you may have done differently as some of the key messages that we would like to come out. But we're going to start with each of our beautiful ladies that are here with us, and we're going to talk about specific experiences in their life stages of having moved overseas and sharing some of their insights into that experience. So we're going to start, and I think our first on board is
Vinakala, Bula again, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We left Fiji around about 1981, 82. So it was my dad's job. He's as a diplomat. His first posting was in Wellington, New Zealand. So for me, I was only 14, 15. I didn't know what to expect, but I was just excited of the idea that, yay, we're going to New Zealand. Like everyone just wants to leave Fiji and go to New Zealand or anywhere out of Fiji. So I was very, very excited, a bit not very fearful of what was unexpected out there, but just truly excited that I was going with everyone, my parents and my three older brothers. So we left, we arrived in Wellington. And can I just get you, Anna, to show that photo? That was actually the first day we arrived at Wellington Airport. So it was the bottom picture. So that was, we arrived, that was the day. And my dad loved taking pictures. So that's sitting in our lounge back in New Zealand with the photo arriving in Wellington. So anyway, we settled in, and then we lived in Lower Hutt. Lower Hutt is one of the 4 cities that make up metropolitan Wellington. And my brother and I attended a school called Hutt Valley High School. And so for me, coming from ACS and starting this experience of a co-ed school, I loved it. There were boys around, so very exciting. We walked in the first day into assembly with, oh my gosh, we walked into assembly, people just like looked, who are those two, with our uniforms and of course, the biggest afros in the world. But so I just found one spare seat, like at the back, I just set myself there. So as we tried to fit into this very new environment, I was fortunate that I dabbed into a lot of sporting activities. So that was my coping mechanism for me, is fitting in, was to I made a lot of friends through sports. So I dabbed in everything: basketball, netball, athletics, tennis, you name it, swimming. And so the school itself I was very quiet. I sat in the front row. I did not know what these guys were just looking at me all the time and thinking, man, do you speak English? Back in Fiji, where you come from, do you guys still live even in straw mud huts or something like that? So all these questions I get all the time. And so a particular thing that I remembered was they used to, and the boys are really mean. I was a tomboy too at that time of my life. And then they used to stick pens in my hair, because of such and they used to say, excuse me, miss, we're missing all our pens. And this little boy, I remember his face quite clearly. He used to say, oh, let's check in Salika's hair. And so you got about 10, 15 pens stuck in my hair, right? And so that went on, and they always they just were quite mean, the kids. But as I went along through school years and got better at sports and representing Wellington in secondary schools and all that, I that was the way I made friends. And so I decided one day that I want to teach these kids the lesson. So I said to my friend Louise Gibson, oh, I remember her so well. And I said to her that I was going to teach these kids a lesson. Louise, we met up again in Wellington since Hutt Valley High School 3 years ago. After 30 years, we met again. And so I hid behind this corner of this building and I saw these guys coming through and I said to, so I grabbed one of them, the one that normally teases me all the time. So I grabbed one of them and I said, listen, if you're gonna keep sticking pens in my hair, back where I come from, we still eat people. So I grabbed his arm and I started munching it, like not, actually just the act of munching his arm. He never came close to me again after that. But those are the sorts of things. Like I got over the whole being different, and I said no. I'm not going to be like this at school. So every time I go home and I say to my parents, I want to go back home. I don't like this place. And then my dad always says to me, Nongulewa wasota. So I think that's one thing that my dad taught me was, to just soldier on. We're here in the land of opportunity, make the most of it, wasota. So anyway, so I went through the whole first year in New Zealand was very, very tough, just trying to fit in. And of course, with my dad's job, the kids started getting to know me and they saw where I lived, and I used to think back and I said, what if I wasn't good at sports? What if I didn't have this house that I live in and all this, the driver dropping us off at school? How would I have coped with nothing of that? And kids like me because of that, So I soldiered on, and one of the other significant things that happened was I encountered racism. People used to call me coconut or go back to your country or monkey. Or one day I was crossing the bridge, and then this group of guys, they looked like tradies, and they drove past and they spat at me, and they said to me, go home, nigger. So I don't know. I didn't know what racism was at the time. It's just very innocent coming from the islands. And then that was a turning point because I went home and I said to my parents, why are people like that? So I think at that early age, I just started knowing that there's good and bad people in this world, because I came from a lot of innocence, my background and seeing, and so that started my way of thinking started changing. But I finally fitted in. It was still hard, and the way I spoke English, it wasn't very understandable to a lot of people around me. The language barrier, the way I acted, or maybe the way I looked, everything was very alien to everyone around me. And so what we did, we had a lot of community involvement with the Fijian community. So that was my connection back to where I come from, a lot of community activities that we had in Wellington. And so from Wellington, we moved to Auckland. And that was my dad's first and only posting. So we moved to Auckland and I went to a girls' school, Epsom Girls Grammar. Now there, I became a real rebel. I was hardly at school. I don't know, I just coped differently there. I was, most of the time I was away in town, hanging around the towns and, best education, but I just, I threw that all away. And then, of course, I coped again with sports, all girls school, back into the all girls school. That was, again, it was okay. Started making a lot of friends. And also, and then, you start discovering, boys came into the picture at Epsom Girls Grammar. And then everything went downhill from there. But I must say, the connection to Fiji was still there. You know, I was homesick most of the time, but I think I coped with my sports, and I became very fearless. I just, you know, I took risks. I didn't really make the most of the education system because I was hard out, just as they say in New Zealand, wagging school all the time and mixing with the wrong crowd. But I probably was one of the leaders of that crowd. So it was interesting, like, yeah, the way I felt in Wellington and the way I coped in Auckland. But yeah, I must say, overall, I do thank my parents for taking us across, and if it wasn't for them, I probably, you know, wouldn't have experienced that chapter of my life. But I always, you know, remember my dad. You know, in anything you do, just soldier on and naposote. And so that's what I've taken across from his legacy is to do that exactly till today. So yeah, that's my little experience in trying to integrate into New Zealand as we did.
Sorry, I said thank you. I'll just take up from what you just continue from what you were saying, Silika, because just to paint the picture, because I think when people see New Zealand now, it's very progressive, very multicultural. But if I was to paint a picture of the 80s, like I came, maybe our family went over maybe 4 years after Silika and them moved to New Zealand. And we all, like, for me, it was Auckland. So we were, like, I was the same. I was excited, something different, but that just, I think school mix is when you go into school, then that's when the reality hits.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I think for me, like because when you first got there, we're just still around family, it felt the same until you go into school. And I think that's the first time for me to ever realize that I was a minority, like, because that school was very like similar to Lower Hutt, very white middle class. You could literally count how many islanders, let alone Maoris, were in that school. And it's very different now, but back then you just stuck out, like you stood out. You walked into assembly, you know, you can count the number of people, like, you know, like the Afros that were in that room. And it wasn't as much of a contrast in terms of my experience with education, because I came from civil grammar. I went to another grammar school, co-educational, so that bit wasn't. In fact, academically, PG was, because we are a lot more driven academically, like our curriculums, like when I came to New Zealand, I actually found it easy because we were like 1 year ahead in maths, 1 year ahead in science. So it wasn't like I came and I was like, we did this last year. So it kind of like, in that discomfort, I think I became more focused because I was getting at that age in grammar where, you know, you start to, you know, hop on the bus and wag one class, and, you know, it's easy to go out with your friends. But you go into a school like that and like you literally have to start from scratch. And it's always harder when you come in as like for me at the time, 14-year-old, because the New Zealand school system was in the secondary school, it starts from Form 3. So you come in at Form 4, everyone's already made friends. So you kind of, you know, still trying to find your way. And then to go into class, and then like even the culture shock, like I'd never, like, we were never seeing, you know, students question and be rude to teachers. Like that was like a huge shock to me. To just, you know, like I was like, I would never want to be a teacher because, you know, you come from a school in Fiji, when the teacher says jump, you jump. Like you'd never talk back, let alone, you know, do back chat to the school teacher because, you know, you'd get the belting. But yeah, that was, you know, just even getting used to that was huge for me. Like, but I feel like that experience taught me resilience. Because I was never, and I think we all respond differently in transition. And like for me, I was very sensitive and I was the same. I literally cried the first time. I would just cry every day, like, please, like I was ready at 15 to leave my family and go back and stay with friends and go back to my old school. Like I did not want to go to school. I didn't, you know, I just wanted to go back to Fiji. And yes, I really relate to what Salika said, like you begging your parents, please just put me on the plane. You know, I still remember Waitangi Day because it's in early February. So we had just started school and we had this public holiday. I think I spent that whole day mourning because I wanted to just go back home. I decided that, you know, Auckland wasn't for me, but I'm really glad, like, you know, of course your parents don't let you do that, but just forcing yourself to get through that transition. And then slowly you make friends and then like as Salika said, like, you know, you do like either you do well at sport, you do well at school, but then that's when you start seeing acceptance. And also, yeah. And then I think now when the Black Lives Matter thing happened this year, like then I look back at, yeah, like I realized I was such an anomaly for that period of time for the teachers. And of course they said good things, but when I think about it now, like that's actually, that came from such racist filters. Like, why should my English be better? Why shouldn't my English have been better than theirs? You know, or why is it always a surprise? And I think that's what I really, you know, like, it's only now I look back and I realize, you know, I didn't know I was just trying to fit in, but I think in trying to be accepted, it forced me to get out of my shy. I was really shy and very, like people look at me now, they can't believe when I say, oh, I was so shy, I was so not confident. But that's what that experience taught me. Because I was like, no, you're not going to put me in a box. You know, it's something just rose up in me that I didn't want to be boxed to what they thought I should be. And I think that's why I always say that at that season in my life, it was, you know, it's your adolescent years, you know, that's the years where you're still trying to come to terms with your identity. You're still trying to know how to grow in emotional resilience. And I think that that accelerated that in me, that helped me, you know, define that I was actually not someone that felt I needed to assimilate. And I actually, I have to say that I had teachers around me that encouraged me and said, whatever you do, like I still remember my English teacher saying to me, Vani, I like the way you speak English, whatever you do, don't pick up our accent. You know, even those little things that there's so many memories, but there's certain things that a teacher says to you that you hold on to. And I think in that way, that helped me. I didn't feel I had needed to assimilate. I just had to be me. And that is what really helped me throughout my years in high school. And I mean, like when I got to I ended up spending 4 years, like I finished the senior high there. And when I got to each year, like you become more, you know, become more involved. And I think I ended up at the end of the high school feeling like I had never felt like I hadn't belonged. It's amazing, like what, you know, is you make friends and you just assimilate. How that happens. And Ariella, over to you. Like, what was that like for you in France as a university student?
Yeah.
I got a scholarship in 2004. I learned much earlier that to finish my tertiary education, I would either have to study my entire life, because University of South Pacific at the time, if you were working, you could only take a maximum of 2 units. But I went straight from high school, I went straight into the Fiji Times newsroom. And then I studied, once I graduated, then I went and I got that scholarship to go to France. So so for me, because I'd been working and I'd been, you know, studying at USP, I thought, you know, there's so many different, I already am interacting with a diversity of, you know, ethnic groups, and I'd be okay. Got to France, and then I realized that because I didn't really speak French, actually I didn't speak French at all. I just had the very basics, and I traveled on my own. So for me, but I was attending a language school. It was part of the Université de Poitiers, it's down south there. So for me, it was from, got to Paris, and then I had to travel down by train. And at the train station, I found my way there from the airport, Charles de Gaulle. But then I'd ask for direction, and in perfect English, they would say to me, I do not speak English. I'm standing there thinking, man, you know, just help a Pacifica girl out here. But, you know, that was already the challenge for me, was language, having to, but, you know, I had basics. I was carrying around a little dictionary, and I would have to go and look at bilingual dictionary, English and French, but I made it, just to really shorten the stuff out. One of the challenges, of course, was food. I cried the first day because there was, my dinner was so, you know, okay, I cried the first day. I'd never missed my family so much, you know. It's just like, it was the first time for me to get away, and it was so far. So for me, it was the language, the food. Then I started going to school. I think the one right thing I did was I opted, when I was applying for this place, I opted to stay with a local resident. So I had to speak French because the lady, she didn't speak any English at all. And of course, everywhere I'm going, the little dictionary, going everywhere, having to, but staying with her meant I went to the market with her on Saturdays, and we would watch TV together. And then she would ask me, so, you know, in French, for me to explain what the woman or man had just been talking about. So it was a really good way of catching up to the language. And I really believe in what people say, that if you want to really learn a language, go to the pubs. And that's what I did too. I would go and sit there, and of course you pick up the really rude phrases. I used one in the house, and my hostess almost, like, you know, she almost fell off a chair. She's like, did you hear that? I had to tell her, and she didn't even want to translate it. But for me, because the French language is such that conversation amongst friends or in ordinary situations, they speak in phrases, you know, it's not like, and when you speak, they think it's very formal because you're doing structure and you're trying to think of, but in fact, they're referencing, is, I reckon, in phrases. And so you have this so that's where I picked it up from while I was learning formal French in the classroom. But that was one way I tried to catch up with the language. And France was also, apart from those two things, just being far. So I had to really budget to be able to talk to my mom, make phone calls. And it's so far off, and you're trying to, and in winter, and I've always preferred to go outside the home to go in, because, you know, payphone, the greatest thing about it was they'd have payphones, you know, they'd have payphones not too far from each other, so I could walk down the street and make my phone calls, and then cry, and talk about the food and everything. But it was, so for me, France was a lot about character building for me as a human being, because I had to really survive. It was survival. And but when I was still, after 6 months in, my mom's big sister died, and I used to be very close to her. And, you know, I really missed it really emphasized for me the social capital we otherwise take for granted. Because I'm there on my own, very far from everybody, knew nobody. And I couldn't even really talk to a Fijian who would understand what I was going through. So, you know, same thing, I just go and cry in the bedroom I was using in that house. So France was, but also France was really great in terms of elevating my taste in food and wine. That was one of the best things I came away with, because every meal was with a wine, and we lived in the south of France. So what Parisians would pay a bottle of wine for like 32 euros, we were able to get it for 16. The difference is huge according to the region, because we were in wine region. Charente-Maritime was a really great place for seafood, shellfish. And pilau, and then the kusima would hit you, and you'd go and order this mussels, and you eat it with bread. And like, I just really, you just gotta be thankful for what you got. But sometimes you really miss the food, and you try and go and buy, like, you see a mango and you take it, and it costs an arm and a leg, and it doesn't even taste like the taste you were psyching yourself up, you know. But it was just small sacrifices, I reckon, in retrospect, that I'd make uh, to really get as much as I could from that experience, because I wasn't paying for it. I had to budgeting. I learned from boarding school, as most of you, you'd gone to boarding school. So that was, you could do that. But then in the other thing about here, a little bit broke, you can call your auntie or uncle or mom, can you please send me some money? Over there, nobody to call. So you kind of have to really, but the food, the cost of food was not so, you could buy pasta and prepare a really great meal without spending more than 20 euros if you were good in starting from scratch. That's the other thing that France taught me first. It was the first time I was living overseas, and you've also had to, well, I don't know about you guys, I had to get used to, how they pre-cook everything. And so the time of cooking is very different from like what you're used to. Because you are most of the time starting from scratch. There you're like, okay, you have to really read never read food labels so closely as I did over there. And then everything is in French too. So you gotta, me and my dictionary, I still have that bilingual dictionary to this day. I mean, I'll just, so for me, it was, the challenges for me was really the food, but it turned out really well because it taught me a really whole new journey in terms of culinary taste. And the thing about France was they were always having festivals, and you were going to art festival exhibitions and museums, gastronomical kind of gathering where you tasted everything for free. Poor student would take herself to this place to just eat all these lovely things. Their markets were amazing, you know, a whole section that just made chocolate. Uh, I was in a space, a town, small town, but it also had a butcher, just horse meat there, because it was a delicacy kind of thing for them. So blew my mind, that first experience overseas. And then the second time I was much later. Oh, if I do anything differently for France, I would have probably reached out to people who might have relatives there already so that I could connect with them when I got there. I did meet a couple of really great, and they remain good friends. One of them, Samson Verma, who now is in Rome, but great lifelong friends that if I had to do it again at that time, I would have probably reached out much earlier because I was just working, graduated this beginning of this week. I flew out on a Saturday. So there was really also not much preparation time. Then 2009, 2010, I was at the university in Sussex, in Brighton. By now, I was like, I knew what to do, reached out much earlier, found myself. So house shared, um, said yes to this place because they had a guinea pig and a really big cat. And, they had two guinea pigs and Big Sam, the really fat cat. So, and that was my thing. That was my anchor because I'm a huge animal lover. Obviously would have preferred dogs, but that kind of really just looking after these animals for the landlady who lived in Exeter and would only come in like when she, occasionally she'd come in for the weekends. The big difference, one of the biggest different things I did differently in England was uh, travel outside of the UK. So I did Wales and Scotland and Ireland even. I went to Ireland to watch the rugby. And in Wales too, I did the rugby. And that was the one big change I did and I felt that, and also obviously a lot more Fijians in England, and so I did connect with some families who were already there, first, second generation British Army families, and it was great. I went to one with like a couple of Fiji Day celebrations when I was there. So that I would go when when I felt like I really needed some local food, or because otherwise I was just saving up as much as I could to travel around. I also I managed to go to Sweden and Denmark. So it was great. And so for me, I think by the time I got to England, I knew a lot. I was a bit more savvy, if you will, in getting in settling into a new country. I loved being able to play incognito kind of thing. Nobody knew you, nobody cared. And so for me, it really was also a huge, in terms of character building. For me, it really helped me realize that it doesn't matter what people say about you. Don't care about it. I mean, if they're not, if it doesn't affect the rent that you're paying, it doesn't matter. And being alone in those some very difficult times, really built your inner strength in terms of just being able to love yourself and being able to say you're enough. You're there already. Just study and do your thing. Yeah. So yes. So for me, by that time, I came back also just appreciating how great it is to be able to enforce little laws. There's a huge difference when you come back and you see all the rubbish and everything. But for me, I'm not judging in that way. For me, those were just very simple but really fundamental things that taught me about just being careful where you put your rubbish, and just being able to come up with solutions yourself, because you are experiencing these things on your own. And while it's okay to be able to talk about it with other people, it's like in England, the worst period for me and it was one of the worst winter that they'd experienced. Trust my luck, even Brighton they had to have chains in the buses, and Brighton never snows. That's what the landlady said. No, it doesn't snow. It's okay. It's not going to be so cold. Snow. Came back from Sweden. I couldn't even recognize my town because of the snow. So you must never, you can't expect anything. Just anything can change. And so it's great that you are able to strengthen your inner self and be able to think solutions on your own, on your feet, especially the budgeting thing came back on. I think I'll just end there for now, but yeah, over to you, Jane. So because we've talked about primary school and secondary school, I did a bit of university coverage. Jane, as an adult, I think.
Yeah, I know it's so interesting listening to you guys, because I can already see, some similarities, yeah, even though we're like at varying stages in our life. But you guys' stories have really reminded me. I had a first spell into Australia that was really short, but I was a little older, but still at that impressionable age. You're away from your parents and your comfort zone and without that peer support. But for me, that was still a baptism of fire, because there's that classroom atmosphere and, you're plunged in the deep end. And even though it's a English-speaking country, there's still like different terms and lingo to wrap your head around, yeah? And it didn't help that I had an accent, so I had to keep spelling everything out. And then, with a surname like mine, it was like, okay, don't even bother saying it, because it was constantly repeating, no, Q is pronounced as NG. So that was the story of my life for a long time. And but I returned late 80s. So at least when I returned, I was a bit older. And I was unmarried but independent, and it was good because at least I had an increase in my outlook and my ability just to navigate like a new country again. But personally for me, I felt the 80s was a really good time to arrive. I think multiculturalism was like the trend, was trending at that time. And 70s, they had the waves of migration, the Italians, the Vietnamese, and the Greeks had come. So by the time we had come, they had almost paved the way. There was, relevant discourse happening. And I just felt it was a really favorable and gracious time to be here. But in saying that, like Ariella had brought up, the social capital, for me, it was, really solid. And I had a multi-generational group of people. And even for the cousins who was around my age, they had already established themselves. So at least I had, it was like I had a head start. Into like they were really good examples on, on what to do. I like their lifestyle, and their mindset really was attractive to me. So, so that was, like it gave me positive direction. And straight away, these my social capital were instrumental in key areas in my life, in particular with my career. ANZ in the 80s, it was, I think they were an incredible organization to work for, because already their core values, were being inclusive and all about equality. So even though that was on a professional level, work back then was almost an extension of your family, yeah? Because you had team building, you had all this bonding going on, and that spilled over, onto the weekends and after work. So for me, fitting in meant I had to be really sociable. It meant, after work drinks at the pub. It was like bottle-os and barbecues, backyard gatherings. But in saying that, that wasn't just like a social space. That was an area where you could also learn, the Aussie lingo, their slang. You'd hear someone asking for a ciggy, someone talking and saying, oh, fair dinkum, or crikey. So for me, that combination, my age at that time, and that social space, I think that was really crucial for me to fit in, because I feel like people back then couldn't really care less about like where you come from or what you look like. That age group, they just wanted, a good time. And I think that worked well for me. But I must say, Melbourne, in a way dictated some bits of my lifestyle, especially my wardrobe. I felt I was gravitating towards, the all black, notorious Melbourne outfit. Yeah, so that was funny, because I think in an unconscious way, I was being morphed into the process of fitting in, in that part. But considering all the factors, my age, the political climate that I arrived in, and, with career and just my social capital, I had imagined something really difficult, but the reality, it wasn't as stressful as, what I had imagined it to be. But, that didn't mean I was spared of any difficulty in fitting in, because I found when I got married and had children, fitting into family spaces then became a challenge for me. That was like totally different story. Space experience where I was able to, assert myself before, the family came in, and, I had to deal with that strain and that adjustment. I don't know how I would have fared with a family in tow, I think it would have been totally different. But I think maybe Anna, you will be more of an expert in that field, if you can share that.
For me, listening to the stories that have gone before me, I find that my experience is very, very different. Ariella talking about being incognito. You know, I've sort of, you know, coming to Britain, I was only 22, and I was married to a diplomat, a British diplomat. And it was like coming into an establishment that I had to kind of, it was really, really very different, but in a very weird way, I saw similarities, and maybe that's the language and the values, you know, the respect, the etiquette and things like that that you have, you know, like we have that in our kind of culture in Fiji, you know, in Morocco and all those kind of things. But, you know, in fitting in, coming in and fitting in, it was quite, I think it was a challenge. Like, I remember feeling out of place at some parties, you know, cocktail parties or dinner parties, because I didn't talk like them, or I didn't, you know, maybe not the same, didn't have the same background and things like that, you know, coming from very humble Fiji to a place where you mix with a lot of diplomats from other countries who are, it was quite intimidating. But I was young and I was ready to kind of, you know, just bask in it. And I remember having, you know, doing all sorts of things to try and fit in. Like I'll go to all the classes that's, they used to offer us in, I don't know whether they still do it now, but in those days, they offer foreign wives. They used to be offered etiquette classes where you go and learn how to entertain and how in British style. And I used to just do these things because they were available to us. And, you know, learning the language, because our first posting was to Brussels and things like that. But, you know, and then I just kind of, I think I did a lot of faux pas, you know, like I would say things wrong, or and I would be assured by my husband at the time, my ex, he would reassure me, you know, he'll say, oh, don't worry, you know, that's okay, just be yourself, you know, and things like that. Because I'll say, oh no, I don't want to go to that party because, you know, I don't like that so-and-so. And then, you know, he'll say, no, he's not there, you know, don't take it like that, just be yourself. They like it, they like hearing your stories from Fiji. And so that's how I kind of built my my reputation, so to speak, in the diplomatic circle in Brussels, you know, being the only Fijian. And they would say, oh, you're the Fijian lady. Oh, I'm so, you know, because in those days we didn't have internet and things like that, where you can just press and see what's going on and see how Fiji looks. And, you know, they used to regard it as being so exotic, you know, like, and I used to think, wow, exotic. But then that was how they viewed it, you know, they'll say, wow, it's so exotic. Where you know, like, how are the people there, you know, some in, especially in Belgium, there's a lady, Miriam, who was, she was married to a reporter. And I remember talking to her, and she actually thought we were still wearing grass skirts, you know? And I said, no, we don't do this. You know, we wear clothes like, and, you know, some of the things I did to try and fit in was wearing the clothes that look like, you know, like all the fashionable clothes. I used to run up bills shopping. But anyway, those were the challenges that were not really really not hard, I suppose, to overcome. And I think what really helped was having a supportive system around you. So I had my ex-husband and my children who, even though they were young, they kind of grounded me, you know, these Fijian kids, and, you know, they're here and they're the things that matter to me, and I'm here with them, and it doesn't matter what anybody says. And to be very honest, when I say, if I have to look back to see if I have to do anything differently, I don't think there is much that I can say to that. I kind of developed as I go with my personality. And I think one big takeaway when I look back is being myself, and not afraid of making mistakes. And because it's not my culture, it's not my, these things are new. So I remember, having dinner one time when I did something again that was, like faux pas. And I said, oh, you know what, in Fiji, that's how we do it, and I would kind of make people laugh, and then, have the mistakes a little bit forgotten. But then they remember Fiji, they remember, and I think it also helped in reinforcing my identity as a Fijian. It built my resilience, my cultural resilience. And I think, just having to be the only Fijian in an environment, and they were interested in who we are and what we do, and the rugby, especially rugby. A lot of people talk about the rugby in Fiji, and just how friendly and how exotic Fiji is. Having gone back to Fiji when my marriage broke down, and I went back in 2012 to live. 2011 to 2015, the changes I saw was, the things that I saw that had really changed was, or maybe some things have, it's how we have embraced the social circle that I mixed with in Suva. They've kind of moved on, but still, it's a very small clique groups that I experienced earlier on in my life as a diplomatic wife. That sort of thing that have changed when I came to Fiji. It didn't used to, maybe because I was younger, but I find that now that you had to kind of fit in again. So there was a kind of culture shock in reverse when I went back to Fiji. That just other things like, for example, when you turn up impromptu turn-ups at home. And I mean, I suppose here, because you don't have your families around, but I can still turn up in my sister's house in Fiji unannounced, but you don't do it here. And the other thing was the random inviting of people. I used to do that a lot when I was young. When I came here, I'd meet people at parties and, oh, come to my house and we'll have a party at home. And, I'll just tell my ex-husband, oh, Paul, we're having a party at home. These people are coming back, and that's what I used to do in Fiji. And it hasn't really changed. Like when I went back, you can still do that, like go out to have a drink. Oh yeah, let's go back, and things like that. And I think those are the things that I kind of, I hold on to. And if I have to make a recommendation to people who are moving into circles like that, or just different establishments overseas, or just life overseas, I think I would recommend that you just be yourself, just be proud of where you come from, the values that represents us, like being generous, being kind, being fun, and things like that, and also being accepting of everyone, and that's us Fijians, I think. I think with these days, with social media and everything, it's really helped, and that was something we didn't have, and we had to swim and find ourselves in where we were, or where where we moved.
And to commemorate the 50th anniversary, we'd like to say
Happy Fiji Day!
Naka.